1993. And this reorganization, I think, was helped a lot by Al-Qaeda. It was helped a lot with traffic through to Iraq and back again, traffic to Pakistan and back again. So what we've seen is many of the tactics being used by Al-Qaeda and other places have been imported in Afghanistan literally for the first time. I mean, the Afghans have been at war for 30 years, but they've never used the tactic of suicide bombing before in such a way. Now they are. Pakistan has never experienced suicide bombing, but now the Taliban in Pakistan are using suicide bombing. So, and I think this is also due to the fact that the movement has become much more ideological. The Taliban were not believers of global jihad and the whole bin Laden philosophy, except for perhaps a handful of people. Today, I think there's much more emphasis on this idea of global jihad and Al-Qaeda beliefs rather than just pure Taliban beliefs.
In terms of recruitment into the Taliban, many reasons have been given: the slow pace of change, corruption, the presence of foreigners, and of course Pakistan is one of the poorest countries in the world as well. What do you feel are the most compelling incentives that people have to join the Taliban?
I think, I mean, we should understand, first of all, the Taliban is a Pashtun movement. That is, it is rooted in the Pashtun ethnic group who are divided between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There are some 15 million Pashtuns in Afghanistan, some 40 million in Pakistan. So Pakistan obviously provides a huge recruiting pool, 2-3 times the size of what Afghanistan offers. And what this tribal belt or this border belt between Afghanistan and Pakistan, inhabited by the Pashtuns, has experienced over the last so many years has been enormous economic deprivation, the lack of state control, the lack of state facilities on both sides of the border. But especially on the Pakistan, because at least Pakistan was a viable state, it was a functioning state, but it was not being able to provide these facilities to these people. And I think that what has happened, what we've seen, is really a complete breakdown of state authority, and that has been replaced by the madrasas, the mullahs, religious parties, and in Afghanistan's case, eventually the Taliban. In other words, these were parties who were fed up with the lack of any kind of facilities that were being given them, and then decided to go into the other extreme, which was basically to mobilize on the basis of Islamic Sharia. Now, they have no economic plans, they have no social development plans, education plans, But again, what they believe in is a system of where Islamic law is meted out fairly and squarely. Now, that doesn't bring, again, the economic benefits, which is why I think towards the end of the Taliban regime in 2000, 2001, many Afghans were very, very disillusioned with them.
You mentioned in a previous answer Iraq as an example, and we've seen in Iraq that many locals became sick and tired of the instability, insecurity that had been caused largely by Al-Qaeda based organizations, and they've actually turned on Al-Qaeda and set up local vigilante groups to fight them. With foreign elements also present in Afghanistan, do you see the same thing happening there?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, you can't compare the situation with Iraq and Afghanistan simply because the government in Iraq, for whatever it's worth, is much stronger. I mean, Iraq was a functioning state before the war. It had a bureaucracy, it had a government, it had a justice system, etc., etc. Now, the point is in Afghanistan is, what is the alternative? You can't really turn to the Afghan government because in a lot of the country there is no Afghan government. It's not a functioning entity. And if there are some bureaucrats representing the government, they're not able to do anything for the people. They can't provide services, they can't provide jobs, they don't have the money for development, etc., etc. So I think the problem in Afghanistan is that who do the people turn to if they turn away from the Taliban? They don't want to turn into the arms of the foreigners and the foreign troops, etc. And they don't have a government on which they can depend upon. So I think this is the real problem, that you have a huge floating population of Pashtuns which are paying lip service to the Taliban simply because there's not a functioning alternative.
I'd like to look at terrorism in the international context now. You've described several terrorist organisations as transnational organisations, and they obviously transcend borders. How do you feel this has happened? What's contributed to this occurring?
Well, in my part of the world, that is Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, we should remember that this is a region where all borders are totally porous. These were borders defined by the British and the Tsarist Russia, the colonial empires. They do not fit any of the ethnic needs of those ethnic groups that are living there. For example, all these borders have divided the ethnic groups. The Pashtuns are divided, the Punjabis are divided, the Baloch are divided, the Uzbeks are divided, the Tajiks are divided. I mean, there's no single ethnic group there in this region which can claim to have got a state because of its, ethnicity. Now, so, I mean, that's a huge weakness, I think. And what we're seeing really is the unraveling of that. Perhaps 100 years on from the colonial era, but we are seeing the unraveling of that. Secondly, I think the fact that these porous borders, make for, very easy movement, very easy shipment of arms, ammunition, money, drugs, etc. And so all this helps fuel the movement. So I think we really, it's a very major structural problem now in this region. So you have now, for example, you had the Afghan Taliban, now you've got the Pakistani Taliban. And tomorrow you may have the Central Asian Taliban.
If I may give you an example from my part of the world as well, in terms of the transnational element. At the end of February, Mohammed Hamid was convicted of recruiting young men in London and preparing them to fight in Afghanistan. But he also wanted to recruit the guys that he was training to carry out terrorist acts in Europe. And